Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump doubling down on his threats against the Iranian regime as the U.S. Treasury sanctions regime officials, and the president's major escalation against communist Cuba. Mario Tzu in Washington, D.C. Trump taps a Fed insider and sharp critic to lead the central bank, who is Kevin Warsh, and will his confirmation mark a shift toward lower interest rates? Jack Bradley with the details. The latest batch of the Epstein files were made public today. The Justice Department released more than 3 million pages, including more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. Former CNN anchor Don Lemon has been arrested, taken into custody by federal agents in connection to a protest that allegedly disrupted a Minnesota church service. He now faces conspiracy and civil rights charges. Jason Blair has the latest. Senator Lindsey Graham is holding up a government funding vote and demanding the Senate vote to criminalize the conduct of officials who run sanctuary cities. That says a partial shutdown is still on the horizon. Luis Martinez has the latest.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump saying Iran already has the U.S. terms of a nuclear deal as the clock ticks on a military strike. This as the president declares a national emergency over Cuba. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Tzu. Mari, good evening.
Tiff, good evening to you. That's right. As pressure mounts for Tehran to accept a nuclear deal, President Trump is saying today that the U.S. has directly communicated and laid out its expectations to Iran and that they do want to make a deal. This is coming today as the U.S. Treasury also sanctions Iranian regime officials for, quote, violent repression and corruption. That is their brutal crackdown on anti-regime protesters. And the president today says he's told Iran it has to do 2 things to avoid military action as the U.S. builds up its forces in the Gulf. 1, no nuclear weapon, and 2, stop killing protesters. Take a look.
Giving Iran any kind of deadline to make a deal before potentially taking
Only
military
they
action?
know for sure. You know, they have to float someplace. They might as well float near Iran.
This coming as President Trump warns that the armada headed toward Iran is larger than the one that was sent to Venezuela. The War Secretary confirming the Pentagon's prepared for possible action.
We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships sailing to Iran right now. And it would be great if we didn't have to use them.
We're having to rebuild how our enemies perceive us. And when President Trump said we're not getting a nuclear Iran, you won't have a nuclear bomb.
The president has repeatedly threatened military intervention if Iran continues to kill anti-regime protesters.
That regime is probably weaker than it has ever been. The protests may have ebbed, but they will spark up again in the future because this regime, unless they are willing to change and or leave, have no way of addressing the legitimate and consistent complaints of the people of Iran who deserve better.
Meanwhile, President Trump's declaring a national emergency over Cuba, threatening tariffs on nations that provide oil to the communist regime.
Are you trying to choke off Cuba?
I don't know. The word choke off is awfully tough. Cuba is a failing nation.
No.
And you have to feel badly for Cuba. We have a lot of Cuban Americans who really were treated very badly, and they'd probably like to go back. I think Cuba will not be able to survive.
In the order, he blasts the regime for harboring adversaries, spreading communist ideology across the hemisphere, persecuting dissidents, and threatening the U.S.'s national security. The order says Cuba aligns itself with, quote, numerous hostile countries, transnational terrorist groups, and malign actors adverse to the United States, naming China, Russia, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah.
Will you make a public commitment today to rule out U.S. regime change in Cuba?
Regime change?
Yes.
Oh, no, I think we would love to see the regime there change. We would like to, that doesn't mean that we're going to make it change, but we would love to see it change.
The order also spells out that the Cuban regime continues to spread its communist ideas, both in theory and in practice, around the Western Hemisphere, thereby threatening the foreign policy of the United States. Tiff, back to you.
All right, Mari, thanks for those updates. President Trump nominates former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to be the next Fed chairman. Warsh is a longtime critic of the central bank's policies and handling of post-pandemic inflation. But could this mean lower interest rates? NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
In the whole country, I would say that this was perfect candidate.
President Trump is nominating Kevin Warsh to become the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Warsh is no stranger to the Fed, confirmed by the Senate as Fed governor back in 2006, the youngest ever in that role at 35. Warsh has been a critic of the current Federal Reserve System, particularly for its policies since the pandemic, saying the Fed has become too involved in areas beyond its role.
They need institutions like the Federal Reserve to be restored to what they once were, which is important institutions that are on the sidelines most of the time.
And change, he says, is unlikely to happen unless...
I think until there's regime change at the Fed, until there's new people running the Fed, a new operating framework, they're stuck with their old mistakes.
But with the Fed chair only having a single vote of 7 on the Board of Governors, is regime change really possible?
I think the Fed chairman is a key component to that larger regime change. The Fed chairman has a tremendous amount of sway in terms of the operations of the Fed, who is actually working there. And with him at the helm of the Fed, I think you would see the deep structural reforms throughout that institution that are needed to really return it to sound monetary policy.
The pick ends months of anticipation over who would succeed current Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, whose term is up in May, but will still serve as a decision maker on the Fed Board of Governors for another 2 years. Now, Trump wants the Fed to cut interest rates sharply, making loans cheaper for everyday Americans. When asked if he talked to Warsh about cutting interest rates, Trump said,
I don't want to ask him that question. I think it's inappropriate, probably, but he certainly wants to cut rates. I've been watching him for a long time.
At the same time, the Justice Department's investigating Powell over renovations of the central bank's building. Powell says that Trump is doing this out of retribution for not lowering interest rates. But Trump says,
this is a small little complex that's costing billions of dollars, most expensive job per square foot ever built. It's either gross incompetence or it's theft.
Senator Tom Tillis, on the other hand, has vowed to block Warsh's confirmation until the DOJ ends its probe into Powell. Now, ultimately, whether Kevin Warsh can steer the Fed through this turbulent era first depends on a Senate confirmation battle, which so far looks promising as there's not too much pushback from Republicans to get that simple majority that he needs. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The latest batch of the Epstein files were made public today. Here's Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche speaking from the Justice Department.
Today, we are producing more than 3 million pages, including more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. In total, that means that the department produced approximately 3.5 million pages in compliance with the Act.
Blanche said some of the files were not taken by Epstein or someone around him, but were found on Epstein's devices. The Justice Department said it did not release 6 million pages of files that contain either personal identification information of victims or depictions of child pornography, death, physical abuse, or injury. Blanche said they are protecting the identity of victims by redacting the face of every woman except Ghislaine Maxwell. He added they did not remove any images of men unless it was impossible to remove the woman without redacting the man. Today's release came after President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act last November. The department said it is committed to protecting victims of sex and human trafficking. Senate Democrats in the White House have reached a deal to fund the government. The Senate is currently voting on the new funding package, but a partial shutdown is still on the horizon. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
The new deal reached in between the White House and Senate Democrats is to pass 5 out of the 6 appropriation bills that have already cleared the House of Representatives and to fund the Department of Homeland Security for an additional 2 weeks at current levels of spending.
If Republicans are serious about the very reasonable demands Democrats have put forward on ICE, then there is no good reason we can't come together very quickly to produce legislation.
The new funding package would need to be approved by the House of Representatives, which is in recess until early next week. And House Democrats have already threatened to hold funding for the Department of Homeland Security past the 2-week continuing resolution.
We have to deal with the issue of reining ICE and the Department of Homeland Security in with the fierce urgency of now. And a 2-week window will evaluate whether that's sufficient time, but there's urgency to dealing with this issue.
Senator Lindsey Graham is holding up the vote in the Senate, demanding guarantees on a vote to criminalize the conduct of local officials who run sanctuary cities in violation of federal law.
State and local officials openly defying federal law that's been on the books for decades, incentivizing more illegal immigration, massive taxpayer ripoff, and a breakdown of law and order.
Senator Graham is also pushing to include provisions in the new funding package to allow for lawmakers to sue the federal government for illegal surveillance on their communications.
You took the Arctic frost language of the Senate and took it all out. You could have called me about the 500,000. I'd be glad to work with you. You jammed me. Speaker Johnson, I won't forget this.
The Republican senator distanced himself from the White House and pushed back against Speaker of the House Mike Johnson.
I don't work for the White House. They're my political allies. I'm close to President Trump. I don't work for him. I don't work for the House.
Government funding expires Friday at midnight, so even if the Senate passes a funding package, we would still see a partial government shutdown over the weekend. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Journalist Don Lemon is arrested after a protest at a Minnesota church service. The Department of Justice has charged him with conspiracy to deprive rights and interfering with someone's First Amendment rights. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
You have the right to worship freely and safely. If you violate that sacred right, we are coming after you.
Attorney General Pam Bondi issues a warning. This is after the arrest of journalist Don Lemon by federal agents early Friday morning. Lemon was seen filming and entering a Minnesota church with activists who are accused of disrupting a Sunday service earlier this month, looking for a pastor who allegedly works for ICE.
When you look at the protesters here, and then you look at the people there praying.
Lemon's attorney issued a statement. Don has been a journalist for 30 years, and his constitutionally protected work in Minneapolis was no different than what he has always done. The Department of Justice also announced the arrest of 3 other individuals involved in the incident. This is along with 3 who were arrested and charged last week. Lemon appeared in a Los Angeles federal court on Friday. And ICE continues its operation in May, announcing the arrest of over 200 criminal illegal immigrants over 5 days. On Thursday, Maine Senator Susan Collins stated that no more large-scale ICE operations would be held in the state, following a conversation with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
I have strongly recommended to her that there be a pause so that we can have a far more targeted approach.
Collins also said that ICE and Customs and Border Patrol will continue their normal operations that have been going on there for many years. And facing pressure from several lawmakers to resign,
she's unqualified.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem responded on Thursday night.
These radicals are attacking me, but I'm just doing my job. I'm following the law, enforcing the laws like President Trump promised that he would do to keep people safe in this country.
And meanwhile, in Seattle, the mayor has instructed the city's police to monitor and verify ICE operations happening in the city. This includes using body-worn cameras to, quote, document the activity of ICE agents. And the DHS continues to highlight daily the, quote, worst of worst criminal illegal immigrants being arrested during their operations around the country. The department is encouraging Americans to view the criminals who have been deported from their area by going to wow.dhs.gov. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And CNN is now reporting that Don Lemon has been released without bail. A Manhattan federal judge today took the death penalty off the table for Luigi Mangione. She dismissed 2 counts from the indictment that she said weren't tied to an underlying violent crime. Meanwhile, the judge allowed evidence found in Mangione's backpack to be used at trial. NTD's Arlene Richards has more details.
Federal prosecutors can't seek the death penalty against Luigi Mangione in the alleged killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, a judge ruled Friday. Mangione was accused of gunning down a health insurance executive outside a hotel in Manhattan in December 2024. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. At the outset of a 39-page opinion, Judge Margaret Garnett said, quote, "The court would be remiss not to note at the outset the apparent absurdity of the inquiry," referring to the defense's argument that the alleged killing wasn't a crime of violence. She said, quote, "No one could seriously question that this is violent criminal conduct," referring to the prosecution's allegations that Mangione carefully planned the killing, then stalked the CEO before gunning him down. But Garnett explained that she was bound by the Supreme Court's precedent over the last 20 years that she said requires her to view the matter from the least serious conduct.
Just wanted to thank the court for this incredible decision.
Garnett left in place stalking charges that carry a maximum punishment of life in prison. In order to seek the death penalty, prosecutors needed to show that Mangione killed Thompson while committing another crime of violence. Stalking with the intent to kill and planning the killing don't fit the definition, which requires actual violent physical force. Prosecutors didn't immediately comment on the ruling. The judge gave them until February 27th to appeal the decision. In a separate order, Garnett ruled that prosecutors can use evidence found in Mangione's backpack during his arrest, including a 9mm handgun and a notebook allegedly detailing how he would kill Thompson. The trial is scheduled to begin on October 13th. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Canadian actress Catherine O'Hara has died. According to her agency, she passed away at her home in Los Angeles after a brief illness. O'Hara's career began at the Second City in Toronto in the 1970s, where she was among the original cast of the sketch show SCTV, short for Second City Television. The show featured legendary comedians, including Martin Short, John Candy, and Andrea Martin. There she worked with Eugene Levy, who would become her lifelong collaborator and her co-star on the sitcom Schitt's Creek. Perhaps her most iconic role, O'Hara starred as Macaulay Culkin's mother in the first two Home Alone movies. She was 71. Coming up, Ukraine says the first day of an American brokered ceasefire showed great success. Arian Pozdar has why President Trump asked Russia directly for the temporary truce. After intense battles, Kurdish forces have agreed to a ceasefire and integrate with Syria's security forces. Meanwhile, the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip is set to reopen on Sunday. Jason Perry brings us the Middle East update when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Ukraine says the first day of an American brokered ceasefire showed great success. Temperatures in the country are dropping to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and many are left without heat in their apartments. President Trump says that's why he made a direct request to Russia to halt strikes on energy sites. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pozdar has the latest.
They said they've never experienced cold like that. I personally asked President Putin not to fire into Kiev.
On Thursday, President Trump said he asked Moscow to stop aiming at Kiev's energy supply. Russian strikes on energy infrastructure have left many Ukrainians without heating in their apartments, with temperatures dropping to 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
President Trump made a personal request to President Putin to refrain from striking Kiev until Sunday in order to create favorable conditions for negotiations.
The spokesman confirmed that Russia agreed to Trump's request. However, unlike the Kremlin, Trump didn't mention the Sunday deadline. And forecasts actually show that the weather in Kiev is expected to get colder starting Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says there are no exact terms of the temporary energy ceasefire.
I am grateful to the American side for their efforts, and we hope the United States will be able to secure this.
But the Ukrainian president confirms that the ceasefire indeed had positive effects on the first day after Trump's announcement.
In all of our regions, from Thursday night into Friday, there were indeed no strikes on energy infrastructure.
He added that there was one exemption, the Donetsk region. According to Zelensky, Russia conducted an attack on gas infrastructure in the area. Meanwhile, in other regions, Moscow is not attacking energy assets, but logistics and transport hubs, such as in Kherson, where local officials say 1 person was killed and 5 were injured, as Russian shelling struck a civilian bus on Friday. Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, residents in Kiev are preparing for a cold weekend ahead, as details of the ceasefire are unclear. One woman says she doesn't think Russia will follow the agreement.
Putin does not comply. He has never complied, not even with his own ideas.
Putin recently invited Zelensky to a meeting in Moscow. Zelensky on Friday rejected the meeting, saying it's impossible for him to go to Moscow, but said Putin is welcome to meet him in Kiev. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
After intense battles in Syria, Kurdish forces have now agreed to a ceasefire and integrate with Syria's security forces. Elsewhere in the region, Israeli officials have announced that the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt will reopen on Sunday. NTD's Jason Perry has a Middle East update.
Syria's security forces have been taking back large pieces of land in Syria that were once controlled by Kurdish forces. The Kurds, which once controlled about a quarter of Syrian territory, were also once a strong U.S. ally in fighting ISIS terrorists in Syria. But now that U.S. support for Kurdish forces in Syria is virtually gone, the Kurds appear to be retreating from territory they once controlled. This comes as President Trump has built close ties with Syria's new leader, a former al-Qaeda affiliate, Ahmed al-Sharaa. And on Friday, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces agreed to a ceasefire with the new Syrian government. And Kurdish forces in Syria also agreed to a phased integration into Syria's forces, which the U.S. called a, quote, historic milestone. However, some Kurds in Syria still don't trust Syria's government.
The arrival of Syrian security forces in large numbers or in significant deployments raises suspicion and fuels fears that massacres could occur and that chaos could break out.
Syria's security forces are accused of killing hundreds of civilians and minority groups, such as the Alawites and the Druze community. Syria's leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, previously said he would hold accountable those who targeted civilians. Also on Friday, Israeli border police reportedly carried out a nighttime operation in the West Bank to catch a terrorist who was planning an attack. Israel said he attempted to escape, but police shot him in the leg. The suspect was detained and transferred to a facility for further investigation. In another development, the Israeli government said the Rafah crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt will reopen on Sunday in both directions for the limited movement of people only. The announcement comes after Israel recovered the body of the final hostage in Gaza, and reopening the Rafah crossing is a step agreed to in President Trump's Gaza peace plan. A 14-year-old Palestinian burn victim hopes to use the crossing to travel to Egypt to receive medical treatment.
They treated me. But no matter how much they treated me, I couldn't complete my treatment here because this wasn't available. I need to get a referral abroad.
Israeli officials have said that about 4,500 patients and caregivers in Gaza traveled abroad for medical treatment during the Israel-Hamas war. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, Panama has delivered a major blow to China. The country's Supreme Court ruling will shift control of the canal out of Beijing's hands and closer to the U.S. Two guests join us to discuss the significance of this ruling when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A major setback for China's influence in the Western Hemisphere, this time in Panama. The country's Supreme Court has ended a contract allowing a Hong Kong-based company to operate key ports in the Panama Canal. The ruling on Thursday comes after mounting pressure and growing U.S. security concerns.
Panama's Supreme Court ruled that the decades-long contract with CK Hutchison is unconstitutional. As a result, the Chinese company will be forced to stop operating the canal ports. It's a major win for President Trump, who argued that China's growing footprint around the canal poses a national security threat. He warned that China's growing influence over its ports could let Beijing block or pressure U.S. military operations and trade ships in a crisis. Panama's president says the country plans to keep the ports running with a temporary operator before launching a new bidding process with revised terms. Since CK Hutchison took over in the late 1990s, Panama has lost more than $1.3 billion in revenue. That's according to a government audit. The ruling also comes amid U.S.-China tensions over port dominance. Last year, the Chinese company agreed to sell dozens of ports worldwide. A business association led by U.S.-based BlackRock and Mediterranean Shipping intended to buy them for about $23 billion. China pushed back on the deal, aiming to maintain control over the ports. Despite China's presence in the region, the U.S. remains Panama's top investor and trading partner. Notably, Panama pulled out of China's Belt and Road Initiative last year, signaling a shift back toward Washington.
And we have two excellent guests joining us now to discuss control over the Panama Canal ports and more. Santiago Vidal-Calvo, he's a policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute, and Casey Fleming, he's the chairman and CEO of Black Ops Biz Partners, as well as the author of the new book, The Red Tsunami, The Silent Storm Killing Your Freedom. Thank you both so much for joining us. Santiago, starting with you, what's your reaction to this ruling?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I see this opportunity as the application of the Don't Row Doctrine in Latin America. And this is very much an expansion of both the interests of the United States, but also a countering for the Belt and Road Initiative in China. And this is my question that I pose to a lot of people. If China was able to invest billions of dollars worth of interest in Latin America, why cannot the United States do the same in the same way that they have done it for the past 100 years? Which is apply security measures for Latin America and kick out foreign enemies of the United States. China is not investing in Latin America because of charity or benevolence. They're investing because of interest. And this is a very important move to the U.S. to both secure the regional interests of Panama, but also of the United States of America.
And Casey, speaking of China, how big of a blow is this ruling to China, especially its influence in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, it's a good blow to the Chinese Communist Party. Over the past 20 plus years, they have gone unchecked in their global aggression. They have been all over Latin America, all over South America, Africa, you name it, and unchecked, and actually, in a lot of times, facilitated by the administration that was in office at that time. So they've gone on to be unchecked over the past 20 years. This is very solid for the United States to take control back over the canal, and also the profits and the revenue going through the canal that they can share with the Panamanians and Latin America. So it's strategic as anything because it's the major canal shipping for and military. So it's something that's very solid.
And Santiago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio weighing in, saying the United States is encouraged by this decision. It seems for now the Danish firm Maersk will take over operation of the two ports from Hong Kong company CK Hutchison. That's according to the Panama Maritime Authority today. How does control of the ports impact the geopolitical landscape here?
Well, it's part of a major strategy that Secretary Rubio has done in Latin America. And we need to put this in the context of what this means. Starting in January 3rd, we had Nicolas Maduro removed from power in Venezuela after a convicted narco-terrorist was put into an American jail by an operation. After this, we also have a coherent strategy to Latin America. And put it in the broader context, the United States is finally seeing Latin America as the front yard of the United States, not as a backyard. You can have a backyard that is very messy and disorganized, but if you have a front yard that is very organized and under the security of your house, then this means that Latin America is going to act accordingly. So what this means to the United States, the control of both ports, means that the United States is going to have full control over who passes the Panama Canal, what kind of transactions are being done there, but also it's a security control. In case of a crisis, the United States can act accordingly to prioritize the interests of the United States and not the ones of China. I think this is very important in both global trade, but also in the application of other things like tariffs or pressure to other countries. All of this comes into effect by controlling those ports, which control a huge portion of the trade that comes from Asia to Latin America and Europe.
And Casey, your thoughts on the geopolitical impact here?
Solid. It's a choke point with trade and military that needs to be controlled by the free world. It's very simple. There's two sides to the coin. You're either free or you're not free, and you're under the control of the Chinese totalitarian Communist Party. So that's the whole thing that's it's on the table. It's either free or it's not free. This is a step in the right direction. Now the next step is to get rid of the Chinese cranes and port equipment that's all weaponized against the free world.
That is another huge concern. Santiago, zooming out though, in the region, China ally Cuba is also feeling the squeeze. President Trump threatened new tariffs on any nation selling oil to Cuba. What is the state of Cuba right now? How fragile is it?
I think the Cuban regime is very worried about the events that happened in Venezuela and that they lost one of their key, if not most important partners in the region. And let me just explain it to you. Out in the operation that happened in Venezuela, half of the forces that were dead or killed by American forces were Cuban military regime members or military that was protecting Maduro. This is how important Cuba was for the region and Venezuela. They have ties and connections to both China, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and FARC and ELN, terrorist organizations in Colombia and Venezuela. So we're talking here that this is a major criminal operation in the region. And the pressure that we are exerting into Cuba is to first say, after decades of your involvement in the region, we're not allowing this anymore. But second, if there were to be a regime change, that would be the most beneficial outcome for the United States. And I quote Marco Rubio on this: we would love to see a regime change in Cuba.
And Casey, on that note, what would be the impact on China if Cuba fell? For example, there's that reporting on the Chinese spy bases on the island. How would that change China's power projection here?
Well, what you're seeing is, like I said, China has been, and the Chinese Communist Party have been unchecked through Latin America, South America, and the rest of the world for the past 20 plus years. So this beat back on the Chinese Communist Party is very significant. Venezuela was the forward operating base for China, Russia, and Iran in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba is a satellite of Venezuela. Santiago is absolutely correct. So it's a definite hit to the Chinese Communist Party. We're seeing that there's not a lot of teeth in what they put together, but it's also a threat to freedom in the free world. And that's exactly what the strategy is. It's actually unrestricted warfare.
And Casey, on that note, staying with you, we've talked about the level of influence China has in these countries and the risks involved. But even here in the U.S., the Chinese regime has made its way into many sectors of our lives. Now, you spell that out in your new book. How important is it to also see this as a domestic issue? With about less than a minute here.
It is a domestic issue. This war is on the American people and on the Hispanic people of Latin America. It's on every free person in the world. It's a war against your freedom for totalitarian takeover by the Chinese regime. That's why I wrote the book on it, to bring it to the attention to all free citizens in the world, including the American people, because this war is on them. It's not on the military, and it's been going on for a long time, and it's hitting the mature stages where you're actually seeing it bubble up to the surface.
Oh, Casey Fleming, Santiago Vidal-Calvo, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
A bombshell report suggests widespread resentment is brewing within the Chinese Communist Party's military. This comes after the ousting of two of the most high-ranking generals in the People's Liberation Army. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
The ouster of two of China's most senior generals is driving widespread dissatisfaction within the CCP's military. That's according to a report in our sister media, the Epoch Times. It cites insider sources close to the People's Liberation Army that say, quote, "Orders are issued, but no one takes them seriously." One of the two generals, Zhang Youxia, was the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, which controls the Chinese armed forces. That position made Zhang the second most powerful figure in the military, second only to CCP leader Xi Jinping.
And what you're seeing from Xi Jinping these days, increasingly, language about staying loyal and staying true, not just to the party, but to him. It bears watching to see if there is a pulling apart in the PLA of I support Zhang or I support Xi Jinping.
Zhang's removal came after the expulsion of 9 high-ranking generals last year, which marked one of the largest public purges within the PLA in decades. Prior to his ouster, Zhang was widely considered to be one of Xi Jinping's closest confidants. Both of their fathers were deeply involved in the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, but the alliance between Xi and Zhang appeared to falter after Beijing announced an investigation into Zhang and another general. According to the Epoch Times report, the decision triggered resentment across the Chinese military, with many officers criticizing the move as loyalty enforcement.
I just don't see Xi Jinping going easily or willingly. And so I think that we are in for probably political struggle and more purges like this in institutions beyond just the military.
Sources told the Epoch Times that Beijing ordered military leaders to enforce loyalty to the regime among their units, but compliance remained minimal, which is highly unusual in China's political culture.
If they have this much unreliable lack of transparency, unaccountability in the military, and then we really need to make sure that our supply chains are insulated, if not completely decoupled from this kind of a risky regime. If there is a change, my bet is the people of China will remember those that tried to give a lifeline to a dying tyrannical regime.
Zhang Youxia was one of the few military leaders in China with actual combat experience. As the investigation continues, the Central Military Commission is down from its original 7 members to 2, with Xi Jinping remaining at the helm. Sam Wang, NTD News.
Coming up, another dangerous winter storm is taking aim at the southeast with heavy snow, strong winds, and possible blizzard conditions ahead. Officials are urging millions to stay off the roads and to prepare now. Christina Corona has the weather update. The TSA is rolling out a new $45 option for air travelers without a passport, real ID, or comparable identification. David Lamb has the details. And in tennis, another pair of memorable matches at the Australian Open yesterday. The finals are all set. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Another blast of Arctic air is sweeping across the country as a powerful winter storm targets the southeast. This comes just days after a previous system brought heavy snow and ice. Forecasters warn the storm could intensify rapidly. NTD's Christina Corona reports.
Some 33 million people across the southeast and mid-Atlantic are under winter alerts. This as a low-pressure system that formed in the southern plains moves east. Forecasters say the storm is expected to strengthen and could rapidly develop into a bomb cyclone. Central North Carolina, including Raleigh and Charlotte, could see 5 to 9 inches of snow, while coastal areas of Georgia and South Carolina may receive 1 to 4 inches. Governors in North and South Carolina have issued emergency declarations urging residents to prepare for extreme cold and possible power outages.
Stay home and off the roads during winter weather. And if you live in coastal North Carolina, be alert for flooding that the strong winds will likely bring. Do not drive through flood waters.
North Carolina Governor Josh Stein said crews have been working around the clock in shifts. They are handling de-icing operations to clear roads from the weekend storm and anti-icing measures ahead of the next round.
Make sure you got non-perishable food, plenty of water, and batteries and other supplies in case you get stuck at home or lose power.
Along the coast, wind chills could drop into the single digits with blizzard conditions possible in parts of Virginia. By Sunday, the storm is expected to become a nor'easter along the east coast, bringing heavy snow, strong winds, and near zero visibility. Communities are still recovering from the last storm with at least 85 deaths nationwide and hundreds of thousands still without power. National Guards troops in Mississippi and Tennessee worked Thursday to clear debris. They also helped residents stranded in vehicles and homes that are still without power as the South struggles to recover. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Air travelers whose ID doesn't meet the latest federal requirements have a new option to get through airport security. For a $45 fee, TSA will attempt to verify the identity of passengers who don't have the required forms of identification. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Starting on February 1st, air travelers will need to bring their real ID, passport, or comparable document to get through airport security. Passengers ages 18 and older who go through security without a real ID can pay a $45 fee as an option. The agency says it is rolling out the TSA Confirm ID. It works by paying the fee on tsa.gov and getting a receipt. Travelers will then be able to use the ID for 10 days from the date of travel listed on the receipt. According to TSA, the receipt needs to be shown to a TSA officer who will then attempt to verify your identity before you go through security. However, there's no guarantee TSA will be able to do so. TSA says this fee ensures that non-compliant travelers, not taxpayers, cover the cost of processing travelers without acceptable IDs. But this process includes screening measures and potential delays of up to 30 minutes. To check if you have a real ID compliance ID card, look for a star in the top right corner. To avoid delays, TSA recommends that travelers bring a state-issued real ID driver's license or ID card. Other acceptable documents, such as passports, permanent resident cards, and other IDs, are listed on the TSA website. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, we've got some NFL and Olympic news, but let's start in tennis, as yesterday we had a couple of very memorable matches at the Australian Open.
Yeah, I'm going to start with Novak Djokovic's win, because he was finally able to solve Yannick Sinner there after Sinner had beaten him 5 times in a row, which is pretty much almost heard of for an opponent to do that to Djokovic. Now, Sinner was also the 2-time defending champion at the Australian Open, which was Djokovic's best venue. And Djokovic actually lost two of the first 3 sets before winning sets 4 and 5 there to advance to the finals. Really incredible win there. And Sinner with having 8 break point opportunities there in the 5th set. Djokovic, though, saved them all amazingly for the win. So Djokovic now advances to the Australian Open finals for the 11th time. He is 10-0 in his previous 10 final trips there. So Djokovic won that match 5 sets, pretty amazing. Now the other semifinal was even more grueling. Carlos Alcaraz overcame some kind of leg issue to beat Alexander Zverev in 5 sets. Now Alcaraz, he actually won the first 2 sets, really was rolling along in the 3rd set before his legs started, it would appear to be cramping up. We didn't quite get a clarity on that. He was clearly limited. Somehow he actually forced a tiebreaker in both the 3rd and 4th sets, though he lost them both. By the 5th set, he was actually moving better, but then he dropped his first service game. Somehow, then Zverev was then serving for a match at 5-3 when Alcaraz finally broke back in the last 4 games to take the match. 5 hours and 27 minutes it took for him to actually beat him. That's a semifinal record at the Australian Open in that grueling heat there. So a big win for him. So Djokovic versus Alcaraz in the Australian Open finals on Sunday. The women's, Aryna Sabalenka versus Elena Rybakina. I think I got those names right. All right, that'll be Saturday morning, so later tonight, really.
All right, well,
got all that?
Big matches and long names. Moving to Olympic news, though. Alpine ski racer Lindsey Vonn crashed earlier today during her final downhill race before the Winter Games. What is her status going forward?
It seems unclear at this point. Now, she said she injured her left knee during a crash today and that she's discussing the situation with her doctors. She also added that her Olympic dream is not over. Now, it certainly didn't look good that she was airlifted by helicopter off the mountain today. Now, Vonn, who's 41, she's already had a pretty amazing comeback story over the past year. Now, she had been retired for 6 years before coming back a year ago in November. In fact, she skis with a partial titanium implant in her right knee, not the left one, which was what she injured today. But she's done very well. She's competed in 8 World Cup races. Her worst showing was a 4th place. Now, her first scheduled Olympic event is the women's downhill on February 8th, so it's a week from Sunday, but it'll be held in Cortina d'Ampezzo, where she holds a record of 12 World Cup wins. So stay tuned. We hope she's all right. That would be pretty tragic to get injured a week before the Olympics. But we'll see. She said she's going to update us on her condition.
All right, well, best of luck to her. Shifting gears to the upcoming Super Bowl, though. New England Patriots quarterback Drake May, who's been dealing with a shoulder injury, missed practice today. What is going on here?
Yeah, apparently he's also dealing with an illness. Now, according to head coach Mike Vrabel, sounded like he sat May out not just for May's sake, but for the team's sake, not wanting to spread this illness around like a week before the Super Bowl. Now, today was actually the first practice that May has missed the entire season. But May practiced Thursday despite that shoulder issue that we previously talked about. Vrabel said the shoulder responded favorably. May, meanwhile, said he doesn't think the shoulder injury will limit his ability to throw in the big game. But just in case, the Patriots have backup quarterback Joshua Dobbs behind him. May, meanwhile, would have very big shoes to fill. He's one of 5 finalists for the NFL's MVP award. So, yeah, we got news every day leading up to the Super Bowl here. Just 9 days away, too.
I would expect nothing less. Speaking of the Super Bowl, you know, many of us watch it on TV, and the highlights are those commercials or ads. Sometimes they're quite funny. We showed one yesterday. Do we have another one today?
We definitely do. Yeah, yesterday we had the funny one with Ben Stiller in that 80s disco Euro ad for Instacart. Today, we're showing a commercial for Hellmann's Mayonnaise starring Neil Diamond. Let's take a look here.
Nobody in the meeting stood up for me, and I was like, okay, guys, I led this project.
I was born in this deli.
What?
I didn't say anything.
I was born in this deli. My best friend was that baloney. That is until I met you. Ham, touching ham, touching cheese, touching you. Sweet sandwich time. Hellman's makes it taste so good. This is how I make friends. I'll squirt you while I'm walking by. I live in the walls. Sometimes I wonder who my parents are. So good. I've never been outside. These are my only clothes. It makes your sandwich taste so good. If you marry me, the curse is broken and I can leave.
No, thank you.
Yes!
Nobody in the meeting stood up for me, and I was like, okay, guys, like, I led this project.
I was born in this day.
Diamond, I guess that's, Neil's lesser known younger brother or something like that. And that was Elle Fanning there at the end, if you didn't notice that.
I did recognize her.
I figured you would. I didn't recognize Andy Samberg there, but that was a pretty funny one.
We'll see what you have next week.
I'm looking forward to this.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. Round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.